So what I've got here is I have one of the side pieces of the rail, or of the frame for the front door, and this is one of the bottom pieces. Well, actually this is the top piece. And I've marked out with my mortise gauge set to the width of my 1/4-inch mortise chisel. And what I'm going to do is cut the mortise in that, and then I will cut a matching tenon on the horizontal piece. And to do that, I made myself a little jig. Paul Sellers used these all the time. He talks about them on a bunch of his videos. So what they're for is basically you clamp it in your vise like this, or I'm going to use a regular clamp because I prefer using the bench top for mortising rather than my vise because it doesn't always hold perfect. But anyway, so luckily I had it so that I just used 2 scrap pieces of plywood because the width is perfectly aligned. But basically what you want is a piece of wood where the thickness is from the fence of your marking gauge to the very first pin of your marking gauge. And I got lucky that this 1/2-inch or 1/4-inch piece of plywood actually fit perfectly. And so what you do is you'll clamp that on, and then you can use that then to position your chisel, so that way you can use it as a guide to get a perfectly vertical mortise. And then you can also come in with a wider chisel and you can, you know, pare down the sides if you don't end up going perfectly vertical with the mortise. So that's what I'll be working on. I'm going to get that flipped around here and get that all ready to go and chop the mortise. Normally I would turn around to make those chops, but I didn't really want to block the camera, so that's why I didn't turn around. And then I'll just go in with a smaller chisel, a normal bench chisel, and clean out some of the stuff that I chopped in there. And the target that I'm shooting for is about 1 inch deep, but as long as I don't go all the way through, I don't really care if I go over that 1 inch by a little bit, because it really doesn't matter since it is a mortise that doesn't go all the way through. You know, the end will obviously be hidden, so not too crucial, but still nice to, you know, aim for a mark and hit it from time to time. So the nice thing about this guide is that all you have to do is make sure that you keep the chisel perfectly aligned with the guide. And then the only thing that you have to worry about from that point is just making sure that you don't let it twist, which is actually why I like mortise chisels, because the handle is slightly oblong shaped instead of round. So it's a lot easier to combat that twist if it happens, and it's a lot easier to feel it too. And then, like I said, you can come in with a wider chisel and pare down the walls. And now we're under 1 inch, so should be good to go. And so now what I do is I take that same marking gauge from the back of the workpiece and I just go ahead and mark out the tenon on the end. So I have it marked out here with a couple of symbols just so I know, and I also said back and I wrote which side, just so I can keep track of what part is where. So you always want to reference the same face when you're using a marking gauge. So for example, this piece will go in like this. And so I just want to make sure that I referenced this face on the upright and then this face on the cross piece. So I already have a scribe line here, and so I'm just going to continue that along. I marked it off. I'm 1 inch from this edge, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that across with a marking knife, and then I'll come in with the marking gauge and mark out the mortise, or the mark out the tenon. And then I'll just go ahead and make sure I reference off the back and mark out the tenon as well. Then I'll just go ahead and pencil these in so they're a little bit easier to see. And now you may have noticed that it's actually off center, and that is actually intentional. And the reason for that is that the width of the cross pieces are actually thinner, sorry, the thickness rather is thinner than the uprights. And I did that intentionally because I'm going to kind of do probably a beveled edge on both sides of the uprights, just to kind of give it a little bit something extra than just a straight flat frame. And so that's the reason why these are offset, and that is because I wanted this to be about 1/4 inch from the back, so that way I could get it mostly centered in the rail, but that only leaves about 1/8 inch on this side, since this is thinner. So that's why this is offset, in case you were curious. Now I've chiseled down to my line, so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and cut these shoulder lines first, and then I will go over to the leg vise and rip them to width. And now, after cutting it to width, I just tested it here, and it's a little bit fat still, more on one side than the other. So what I'm going to do is take the router plane and just kind of clean it up, get it to about the same, you know, consistent from one side to the other, and then get it so that it's going to fit in there without splitting out my mortise. So still a little bit fat on that side. So now I'm going to flip it over and go from the other side, shave that side down a little. Well, actually let me check and make sure that, so that lines up perfectly. as does that. So yep, I'm going to take it off of this narrower side here. There we go. So now I will mark this out, and then we can go ahead and cut that to the actual width. All right, and then I'm just going to take a little block plane here and then knock off these corners. And the only reason I do this is that way, just in case there's something in the corners that's not perfectly taken care of, it won't really matter. It's a little bit tighter than I want, so I'm going to pull it back out. Ugh. Maybe. Check to see, and I can see where it's rubbing on the edge, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that up in the vise this time real quick. This is the kind of thing that you definitely want to sneak up on, because if you go too far, it's really hard to fix that. There you go. There we have it. Nice crisp lines all the way around, and now I just got to do the other side, and I will get back to you once the frame is done. Alright, so I've got all my pieces cut here. I also cut them to length. I haven't planed them yet. I'll do that once it's assembled, but all the mortise and tenon joints are now done, so I just got to put it together. So now I've got the frame all put back together and assembled, and it's sitting on top of the actual Shadowbox itself. So this is done as far as the main assembly goes. I still have to, you know, cut some mortises for some some hinges, and then I also need to route a groove on the back. On the inside, I guess it'd be rabbets, just like I did for the back of the case, so that I can inset the piece of glass that'll be going in the door. And before I do that, I'm going to glue it up, but I want to go ahead and finish these with whatever details I end up doing. I'll probably just do a bevel along both of these edges to kind of give it a little bit more geometry, I guess, a little bit more difference in the cross pieces versus the vertical pieces. So that'll be the next step, and after that I'll get them glued up, and then once they're glued up I'll trim them all. I'll trim all these edges because I left them a little bit long so I could sneak up on a flush fit, and after that then we'll work on getting that rabbit run. So that's all for now.